Buckle up for a wild ride today, because we're going deep into a world where science fiction and real-world policy collide.
It might sound strange.
But think about it.
Yeah.
Those stories we love, from Star Trek to even Frankenstein, could be shaping the rules that govern our lives.
You know, when you think about crafting policies, it's like envisioning the future, right? And that's what science fiction writers do too.
You're totally right. And someone actually working in policy had this same thought. You shared this source, Science Fiction as a Policy Medium. The author, he was writing a memo about, get this, biotech in the military.
Wow.
And realized he was basically writing science fiction, just in boring bureaucratic language.
He makes such a good point, though. Every law, every regulation, it's all trying to shape a world that doesn't even exist yet. So, in a way, policymakers are kind of like speculative fiction writers themselves.
That's a great point. And this excerpt goes into some specific examples of how science fiction has impacted policy. Let's start with a classic that still gives me chills, Frankenstein. Back in 1818, Mary Shelley's novel gave us this lasting image of the reckless scientist and all the unintended consequences that can happen when you mess with the natural order of things.
And that idea has stuck with us through the centuries. It affects how we see scientific advancements and even how we regulate them. Think about the protests against recombinant DNA research back in the 70s. Those protesters used Frankenstein imagery a lot to show their worries about scientists playing God.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing how a story can capture those deep fears and shape how the public sees things. And it goes beyond just the imagery, too. The term frankenfoods, that popped up in the 90s.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example.
It's a term straight from fiction, but it became the go-to way to talk about genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. It just tapped into those anxieties about messing with nature, like in Frankenstein.
So powerful how one word can carry so much weight, like the whole Frankenstein story is right there in it. We've talked about the reckless scientist trope, but what about actually controlling or designing life? That's where Brave New World enters the scene, right?
Exactly. Aldous Huxley, back in 1932, he imagined this society in his novel where people are genetically engineered and put into predetermined roles. And it became this, essential reference point for discussions about cloning and human enhancement, technologies that really push the limits of what we consider natural.
The excerpt mentioned how Brave New World was almost always brought up in talks about cloning. It's like everyone understood the potential dangers because of Huxley's warning.
Oh, absolutely. And that shared understanding had real-world consequences. When the U.S. was dealing with the ethics of cloning in the early 2000s, a bioethics council specifically mentioned Brave New World when they recommended banning human cloning. And, the U.S. actually chose not to federally fund that research.
A book published before we even knew about DNA had that much impact. It's pretty incredible. And then we've got Gattaca, which takes genetic engineering even further. It imagines a world where your genes decide your entire fate.
It's a chilling look at what could go wrong with genetic knowledge. In that world, discrimination based on your genes is completely normal.
The excerpt pointed out how Gattaca was a wake-up call for policymakers. It raised concerns about genetic discrimination and the need to protect people's rights.
And those concerns were addressed directly in the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, or GINA. Passed in 2008, this law is basically trying to prevent that Gattaca dystopia from happening. It stops employers and health insurers from using genetic information against people.
So science fiction isn't just for entertainment. It's like a mirror to our hopes and fears about the future. And those reflections can sometimes lead to real change. We've seen it with biotech, but what about artificial intelligence? Has science fiction shaped how we think about AI and robots?
AI is another big one. Science fiction has really influenced how we talk about AI, giving us both warnings and hopeful visions. One early and super influential example comes from Isaac Asimov and his 3 laws of robotics. You remember those?
Of course. A robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. I practically had them memorized as a kid. But wait, those were from his fiction, right?
Yeah, that's right. They were a tool Asimov used to explore the ethical issues with artificial intelligence. But the cool thing is, these made-up laws have actually become part of real policy discussions about AI.
No way. So those stories I loved as a kid are now impacting how we think about regulating AI.
It's true. In 2017, the European Parliament actually mentioned Asimov's three laws in a resolution about rules for robotics. There was even a suggestion to include those laws in the French Constitution.
That's wild. Asimov's work has literally made it into government. It shows how those seemingly far-out ideas can get people talking and even affect real decisions. But I did notice the source mentioned that Asimov's laws might be too simple for how complex AI is today.
Yeah, that's a valid point. But even if we don't use those laws word for word, Asimov's work gave us a way to think about AI ethics, a place to start discussions that might not have happened otherwise.
So even if they're not a perfect plan, those laws planted a seed in our minds about ethical AI. And that seed has grown into all these discussions about developing AI safely and ethically. It's amazing how stories can have such a big impact.
Yeah, they really can.
Okay, so we've got everything from Frankenstein's monster to AI. It's clear those stories we tell ourselves about the future really do matter. But before we go any further, something the source mentioned really stuck with me. This idea that we're all co-authors of the future. What do you make of that?
It's a deep idea, isn't it? It means we're not just watching the future happen, we're actually helping to make it.
Like, we're all writing one big story together, and the choices we make, even small ones, are part of how that story unfolds.
Exactly. Every choice, every action. It's like adding a new sentence or paragraph to this ongoing story.
And the stories we choose to believe in, those will shape the world we end up creating. It's exciting and kind of scary at the same time.
It is. But it also makes us realize how important it is to be aware of the stories we're telling ourselves and the choices we're making. Because if we're always focused on those worst-case scenarios, those dystopias, we might end up making them come true.
It's like that saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. What we believe really can affect what we do and ultimately what happens in the future. So how do we make sure we're writing a future we actually want to live in?
That's where having a sense of agency comes in, recognizing that we have the power to make a difference.
So it's not just about predicting what will happen, it's about making it happen.
Exactly.
And being aware of the stories we're telling ourselves and the choices we're making.
Yes. And that's where science fiction can be so valuable. It lets us explore all sorts of possibilities, challenge what we think we know, and imagine a better future.
It's like using those stories as a way to test out different ideas, to see what matches our values and what doesn't.
Exactly. By doing that, we can start to figure out what's important to us and how to use that to guide our choices.
So science fiction can help us be more aware of how we're shaping the future.
It can, especially today with all the challenges and opportunities we're facing with technology, climate change, and how our society works.
It's like we're standing at a fork in the road, and the choices we make now will have huge consequences down the line. Science fiction can help us see those paths and encourage us to choose wisely. But how do we make sure we are choosing wisely? How can our listeners become more aware of their role in shaping the future?
It starts with paying attention to the stories we're taking in, the ones that are shaping how we think.
It's about being critical, not just accepting everything we hear or read.
Exactly. And then try to find stories that inspire you, that make you think differently, and that show you a future worth fighting for.
So it's about using those stories to fuel our imaginations, to broaden our view of what's possible, and to help us as we make decisions that shape the world around us.
I love that. It's like a call to action, reminding us that we all have a part to play.
And that part doesn't mean you have to be a politician or a scientist or even a science fiction writer. It just means being engaged, thinking things through, and being willing to imagine something better.
That's a great way to put it. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this part of our conversation.
You know, it's amazing how these stories, even the ones that are fiction, can have an impact on the real world.
For real.
They shape how we talk about things, they influence decisions, and they even help us understand what these new technologies mean for us.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
So we've talked about how science fiction has shaped our views on biotechnology, but it goes beyond that, right? What about artificial intelligence? How has science fiction influenced how we approach AI and robots?
AI is another area where science fiction has had a big impact, both with cautionary tales and inspiring possibilities. One of the earliest and most influential examples is Isaac Asimov and his three laws of robotics.
Oh, those are classics.
Yeah.
I remember them from Asimov's stories. They're practically burned into my memory.
A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law.
Exactly. It's amazing how those laws, which were originally created for fictional stories, have become so ingrained in our understanding of robots.
It is interesting. The fascinating thing is that these fictional laws have actually made their way into real-world discussions about AI ethics and policy.
Wait, really? So those stories I read as a kid are now influencing how we think about regulating robots.
It's true. In 2017, the European Parliament actually referenced Asimov's 3 laws of robotics and a resolution about civil law rules for robotics. And there was even a proposal to incorporate those laws into the French Constitution.
That's incredible. It just goes to show the power of storytelling, to shape not only our imaginations, but also our approach to real-world challenges. But as we've discussed, real-world AI is much more complex than the robots in Asimov's stories. Do those laws really hold up in today's world?
That's a good point. While Asimov's laws provide a valuable framework for thinking about AI ethics, they might be too simple to apply directly to the complexities of modern AI systems.
Right.
But, even if we don't adopt those laws exactly as they are, they've started important conversations about responsible AI development that might not have happened otherwise.
So even if those laws aren't a perfect blueprint for the future, they've planted a seed in our minds about thinking ethically about AI.
Exactly. And those seeds have grown into robust discussions about how to ensure that AI is developed and deployed in ways that benefit humanity.
Which brings us to some of the more common anxieties about AI that we see reflected in science fiction. Think about movies like The Terminator or The Matrix. They tap into those deep-seated fears about AI becoming too powerful and potentially turning against us.
Yeah, those narratives have definitely shaped public perception and fueled debates about AI safety. But as with any powerful tool, the key is understanding both the potential benefits and the potential risks. Focusing solely on those evil AI scenarios might distract us from other important considerations.
It's true. Like the issue of algorithmic bias that we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
Could you remind our listeners what that is and why it's such a big concern?
Sure, algorithmic bias is when AI systems, because of the way they're programmed or the data they're trained on, make decisions that are unfair to certain groups of people. It's a subtle but pervasive issue that needs to be addressed to ensure that AI is used ethically and responsibly.
So it's not necessarily about robots taking over the world, but about how AI could make existing inequalities worse if we're not careful. It's about ensuring these technologies create a fairer and more just world rather than making things worse.
Exactly. And this is where science fiction can play a crucial role, not just in raising awareness about potential risks, but also in helping us imagine alternative futures where AI is used for good.
So it's about using those stories to get us thinking about all the possibilities, both the good and the bad.
Absolutely. And when it comes to finding that balance between caution and optimism, there are some really innovative initiatives out there that are bridging the gap between fiction and policy in remarkable ways.
The excerpt mentioned a few of those, like NATO using a graphic novel to explore future warfare scenarios.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought? A graphic novel informing military strategy. That's wild.
It is. It's a great example of how storytelling can help policymakers think differently and consider a wider range of possibilities. And it's not just limited to military strategy. Arizona State University has their Future Tense Fiction project, which pairs short stories about near-future dilemmas with policy analysis.
So they're taking those what-if questions that science fiction writers are so good at and using them to start real-world policy discussions.
Exactly. And these initiatives are gaining traction outside of academia as well. You won't believe this, but the excerpt even mentioned that Singapore's government commissioned science fiction writers to help with their long-term planning. Imagine that science fiction writers on the government payroll.
Wow, it's amazing. It really shows how people are starting to recognize that science fiction writers can offer valuable insights to policymakers.
It highlights a shift in thinking, recognizing that science fiction isn't just entertainment. It's a powerful tool for exploring complex issues, sparking critical conversations, and ultimately shaping the world we want to create.
Okay, let's take a step back for a second and go back to something we talked about earlier, this idea that we're all co-authors of the future. I think that's one of the most powerful ideas we've discussed. What are your thoughts on that?
It is a profound concept, isn't it? The realization that we're not simply along for the ride when it comes to the future, but active participants in shaping its course. Every choice we make, every action we take, contributes to the unfolding narrative of our collective future.
It's both empowering and a little bit scary at the same time.
Yeah.
It's empowering because it reminds us that we have a say, that our choices matter. But it's also a little daunting because it makes us realize the weight of those choices and the responsibility we have in shaping the future.
Absolutely. But acknowledging that weight and responsibility is crucial. That's what allows us to make choices that align with our values and aspirations for the world we want to create. And it's what makes the journey so meaningful.
So it's not just about predicting what will happen, but about actively creating the future we want. It's about recognizing that we all have a pen in hand ready to write the next chapter of human history.
And that pen is much mightier than we often realize. Our stories have the power to shape perceptions, inspire actions, and ultimately change the world.
I love that. It's a call to action reminding us that we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
And that role doesn't require us to be policymakers or scientists or even science fiction writers. It simply requires us to be engaged, thoughtful, and willing to imagine a better world.
That's beautifully said. I think that's a perfect point to move on to our final thoughts. We've covered a lot of ground, but I'm curious to get your take on something. The source material emphasized this idea that science fiction isn't just entertainment, but a powerful tool for shaping the future. It's kind of wild to think that something as out there as science fiction could actually have a real impact on the policies that shape our world.
Yeah, it really shows how powerful stories can be. They get our imaginations going and make us think critically about what we're doing and what could happen as a result.
It's like those stories give us a sneak peek into the future, a chance to try out different paths and see where they lead before we actually go down them.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to think about science fiction as more than just entertainment. It's a tool for thinking and talking about things. It's about asking what if, exploring different points of view, and questioning everything we think we know about the future.
So we shouldn't just be passively reading or watching science fiction. We should be actively thinking about the ideas it presents and using them to understand the real world better.
Right. It's about understanding that science fiction can spark really important conversations about the kind of future we want and how we can get there.
And those conversations are more important than ever, don't you think? With all the crazy advancements in technology and the global problems we're facing, it feels like we're at a turning point.
Oh, absolutely. We're living in a time of massive change and uncertainty, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed by it all. But science fiction gives us a way to make sense of it all, to grapple with the ethical and societal implications of these new technologies, and to imagine other futures that are in line with our values.
So it's not about knowing exactly what the future holds, but about using science fiction as a tool to explore the possibilities, start important discussions, and empower ourselves to make good choices that shape the world we want.
You got it. And that's why it's so encouraging to see things like we talked about earlier, NATO using graphic novels to explore future warfare, Arizona State University combining short stories with policy analysis, even governments like Singapore hiring science fiction writers for long-term planning. It shows that people are realizing that stories can help us deal with complex situations and shape the future.
It's like they're saying, hey, those stories we thought were just for fun, maybe they hold the key to understanding the choices we have in the world we're building.
Exactly. And realizing that has the potential to change how we approach policymaking, problem solving, and even our daily lives. It's about embracing our imaginations and using them to create a future that's both amazing and sustainable.
That's a really powerful thought.
Yeah.
But how do we make sure we're using that power for good? How do we make sure science fiction helps us build a future that benefits everyone, not just a select few?
That's the million-dollar question. It's not enough to just consume science fiction without thinking. We have to engage with it critically, question what it's telling us, consider the ethical implications of the technologies it portrays, and use it to have meaningful conversations about the future we want to build.
So it's about being part of the storytelling process, not just sitting back and watching.
Exactly. It's about using science fiction to reflect, discuss, and ultimately take action. It's about understanding that we all have a role to play in shaping the future, and that our choices, no matter how big or small, really do matter.
I love that. It's a powerful message that really resonates with me. We're not just along for the ride. We're active participants in shaping the future.
And those choices can have ripple effects that reach far beyond our own lives, influencing history and shaping the world for generations to come.
It's humbling, but also incredibly empowering. It means we can make a difference, leave our mark on the world, and contribute to a future that's more just sustainable and fulfilling for everyone.
It's a reminder that the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create together.
Beautifully said. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world where science fiction and policy meet. We hope you've gained a new appreciation for the power of stories, a deeper understanding of how they can shape our world, and a sense of empowerment as you face the complex future ahead. Remember, you're not just watching this unfold. You're a part of writing the story. Choose your words carefully, and let's create a future worth sharing.